It is with the utmost pleasure to introduce to you a woman who is incredibly special. Although her life had repeatedly positioned her in incredible terror, her spirit continued to gather strength. Her strength is beyond measure. This is Jane.
So I don't want to say I was doomed from the start, but I will say that my soul chose an interesting path. I was 8 months in utero when my parents separated. I had 3 older siblings. I sort of became a pawn in their relationship, or the separating of their relationship. And I didn't really see my dad for the first few years of my life very much. I was pretty afraid of him, not knowing him that well, and my mom used that to her advantage. And then when I did start going to see him, I really didn't like being there with my dad and my stepmom. My mom soon got remarried as well to my ex-stepfather, and she had my younger sister. You know, having my stepdad around was very helpful for me. He was the father figure in my life until I was about 10 or 11. I had already been a child of divorce, but I wasn't really alive for that. It just kind of happened around me, and I took on the energy of that. But then I also took on the divorce of my mother and my stepfather. Through that, I started writing. You know, there was, everywhere I've lived actually, in my entire life, I've always had a little outside getaway. And I would climb out on the roof and I would write in my journal while my mother and stepfather were arguing. And later when she was dating other people and in other toxic relationships, and those men would be at our house, I would climb out on that roof and write. And that's how I got through it. I became my own therapist through writing. And, you know, we were latchkey kids, my siblings and I, and we kind of raised ourselves and each other. So that left a lot of room for mistakes. So I would say it was probably within the few years after my mother and stepfather separated and divorced that I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, as they say. I had one friend who I became very close to. I got arrested with her once when I was 13 for being out past curfew, and another time for shoplifting. And I was kind of just like there to have a sense of belonging, but I never quite felt right in those situations. You know, when I was young, I read tarot cards, and I was like into magic and witchcraft books. And so I had this quest for spirituality within me. When I was 15, I convinced my all but absent family to let me backpack across the Middle East for 2 months without parental guidance. You know, I was really in search of this sort of, like, where did I come from? And I had this sense of my spiritual nature, but I kept adding on stuff that was taking away from it. And so I went backpacking across the Middle East. I found Buddha in the Wailing Wall, literally. A note fell out at my feet, and it had a little picture of Buddha drawn on it. So, you know, retrospectively, I was kind of like, all of these concepts of God and religion and philosophies are not separate. And that was, you know, sort of one of the first messages in my memory that I remember receiving that told me to look beyond what I knew to find that spiritual truth I was seeking. You know, my grandmother was very close to me. We were unusually close. I'm sure that we've had other relationships in previous lifetimes, she and I. She was also a card reader and a self-proclaimed psychic, and we just connected on a level different from the rest of my family. She was very overprotective, but she didn't live with us. So she would think that I was home probably sometimes, that I was, you know, walking down the block with my best friend at the time, and during one of our walks through the neighborhood, we ended up at, we lived in the suburbs, in the northwest suburbs, and there was some Section 8 housing a couple blocks away, where they had moved people from the inner city over to the suburbs. So I would go with her there, and she started dating one of these boys. We were about 12 at the time, and I would always go with her. I never went to these boys' houses myself. But one day she wasn't able to come with me, and I was walking, and there was a boy my age who I had a crush on, and I went to go see him, and I rang his doorbell, and a much older man answered, and he opened the door and invited me in to wait for the friend I wanted to see. He was watching pornography when I walked in, and he had me sit down on the couch and then said, "I want to show you something." Brought me to a bedroom and laid me down and asked if I could do what those girls were doing in the video, and I had no idea what that even meant. At that point, I think maybe I'd kissed a boy, maybe I'd been felt up once, you know? I was very inexperienced, and he forced me to give him fellatio, and in the middle of that, I just stopped, and I was like, "This does not feel right, I'm done." He's like, "But you're not finished." And I just ran out crying, and I remember that boy who I had a crush on found out about it and never spoke to me again. Within that same year, I was maybe 13 by then. Again, I found myself going to that area of town by myself. I was riding my bike, and I saw another boy that looked familiar standing outside near those Section 8 houses, and they invited me in to hang out, and said that my friend, who wasn't with me at the time, was supposed to come by too. So I went in, you know, I just wanted to belong. I belonged to nothing. The man that my friend was dating, he was probably about 20, and his older brother, who was about, I don't know, 26, 27, and I was about 13. It was the three of us there. The older brother sat next to me on the couch, and his brother, who is my friend's, you know, boyfriend, sat across from us while he started putting his hands on my thighs and touching me inappropriately. And, you know, his brother kind of cackled from the corner across the way, the chair he was sitting in, like, "Oh, I think she likes it." And then he escorted me back into the one bedroom that was in that tiny apartment and asked me a question that to this day, like, I still remember as if it just happened, though I'm not so emotionally attached to it. He said, "Can I see how deep you go?" And I had no idea what he meant at the time. And he took off my clothes and started having sex with me. And I knew that felt totally wrong to me. So I didn't move while it was happening. I was just frozen. And he was trying to tell me, "You have to move with me. You have to, you know." And I was just scared out of my mind. So all of a sudden the doorbell rang, and as soon as it did, I bolted. I just got up, ran out the back sliding door, and bolted and ran home. And I remember going home, and I climbed out on my roof, on that slanted roof where I would write, and I started writing, and I was like, "Is he my boyfriend now? And if he's my boyfriend, what does that mean?" You know, and I had this sort of like adult conversation in my head about it, trying to make sense of it, although none of it really made sense. Clearly, he had just raped me. It's like, I need to discuss this with him, you know, and figure out what that was. So I decided I was going to go back over there, and I was only a couple blocks away, and I rang the bell, and instead of just buzzing me in, they came out. And with them were three bigger, older girls. Not as old as these boys were, but I was about 13, the girls were at least 16 or so, and there were 3 of them and 1 of me. And so the 2 brothers came out with these 3 girls and immediately started beating the shit out of me. These 3 girls just jumped me and like threw me in these thorn bushes and just started banging on me everywhere. 3 on top of me, 3 older girls on top of me. I mean, it's clearly not a fair fight, so I was just covering my head and like balled up on the ground, covered in thorns, while I was getting my ass kicked. And the brothers were like, "Come on, fight back," yelling from a corner, you know, like over the way. And, you know, obviously there was no chance whether I was fighting back or not, so my best chance was to like cover my needed parts and just take it. And finally they stopped. You know, they were saying like, you know, "You stole her man," and it was like, I just got my virginity stolen and then I was being beat up for something I didn't do. And then a few days later, those girls showed up at my house and rang the doorbell. And like my mom or sister, whoever answered, told me that there were people at the door for me, and I came down and like I was like a deer in the headlights when I saw them there. Like, what are you doing here? You know, I kept like the screen door closed, but they're like, you know, "We just came to say sorry, but we just thought you needed your ass whooped, so peace." Like, that was that. I graduated early from high school and I moved out and got an apartment in the city when I was 17 with my then best friend. We got a 1-bedroom apartment and I was going to school at Columbia, and I was also going to like rave parties all the time on the weekends. And you know, I still didn't have structure in my life. You know, we had a lot of freedom to explore, and relative to the people I know, which is most people who grew up with too much structure, particularly religious structure, I feel very blessed to not have had that. But I also always longed for like healthy discipline and guidance and structure and some kind of foundation with which to build from. Instead, everything I came to, I discovered on my own. And when you're young and you don't have the tools and you don't understand boundaries and, you know, you just don't have the right coping methods, that can lead to a lot of trouble and learning things the hard way. So I went to school for a while and I was doing really well. I still love learning. I started dating this guy who I actually met online. At the time, there wasn't like Tinder or like dating apps or anything like that. It was basically AOL Love was the dating thing to go to. I was on AOL and I met this guy who was probably about 6 years older than I was. I think I was 19 at the time. I had just come back from a trip to the Virgin Islands, and while I was there, it was the last day I was there, and I went into a shop and I saw these 2 rings in a glass case. They were like never-ending knot rings. At that moment, I just had this like instinct that one of them was for me and one of them was for the person I was going to spend forever with. And so I bought them both, and I went home and I met this man shortly thereafter. And the first day we hung out, I remember he was wearing a backpack, and on that backpack was that exact same ring, only bent out of shape, hanging off of his zipper. And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, I love that ring, but I can't wear it anymore, it's bent out of shape." And I said, you know, I had those rings with me and I took it out. It was like, I was not planning on giving this to someone who I just met, but it seemed so, you know, I love a good story, and good stories get me in a lot of bad situations. So I pull out these rings and I was like, "Or can you still wear it?" It was literally identical to the one that he had. And I gave him the ring. And, you know, from there, because of that one little moment, I was so determined to make things work with him. I was with him for 3 years, and it was a very abusive relationship. We moved in together. I found this amazing apartment for such a good deal, 2 bedrooms. I was in school, you know, I felt like this is where my adult life is really gonna peak. You know, I was like 19, which is so absurd. And it's like sometimes these signs come and, you know, like this place turned up for the right price in the right neighborhood, you know, with the right space for us to move in together. And sometimes those things happen so that you can do that, and other times they happen so that you can learn how to discern, you know, to say no. But I said yes.
We've all been fed romanticized ideas about love, but particularly for women, this conditioning is ingrained into our psyches much more strongly, as most of our childhood female story figures were princesses, waiting for love to find them. We have magazines telling us how to be the perfect woman to catch his attention, and that the most important thing is to fall in love with someone for your life to be complete. But I think these romanticized ideas are designed to disempower us, when we often cling to these stories, ignoring a very real reality to stand up for what we truly deserve.
Probably about halfway through my next semester, while the boyfriend was at work, I think he worked like as a bagger at Whole Foods or something. I had these really horrible like stomach cramps. I just kind of assumed that it was like a female related thing, but I didn't know in what way. I just know I'd never experienced cramps like that before. And a friend of mine, she had just moved into a house down the block. She and her boyfriend came by to visit me. I remember having this horrible, excruciating pain while they were there, and she was like, "Do you want us to take you to the hospital?" I was like, no, I'm sure I'll be fine. Maybe I just like ate something bad and it needs to come out of my system. Maybe you guys should just go home and I'll call you tomorrow. So they left, and this pain only got worse. Now, like, I was having shooting pains in my shoulders and just like all over my body. And I had like, it was almost like a light period. You know, there was blood, but I had just finished my period the week before, so I didn't know if it was just some weird thing related to that. I was really uneducated on women's health at the time. And I just tried to get it out of whatever it was. It felt like something needed to exit my being. Then I started like just sweating profusely. And I went to go lay in bed because I was getting weaker and weaker. This was over the course of several hours. And eventually the boyfriend came home, and by that time I was laying in bed, and it looked like I had been, you know, the whole bed was out in the rain. I had been writhing in pain for hours. And I was like, I think I need to go to the hospital. And he was like, oh, you probably just have cramps and you're just being dramatic. And I'm like, well, I've never experienced anything like this before. Will you please just sit with me and like hold my hand? And he was like rolled his eyes at that. He was annoyed at that. And I was like, well, I just need to call an ambulance then. And he literally cut he had cut the phone cords, not that night, but he did it like the week before when he found an old phone bill of mine and saw that a boy had called me to wish me a happy birthday on my birthday. So I couldn't call an ambulance. And he wouldn't take me to the hospital. But at some point, I knew that I was dying. Like, I stood up and my body got so weak that I collapsed. And I was like, come hell or high water, I'm getting myself to the emergency room. Like, it is not my time to give up. So I keep standing up, and you know, I was wearing a dress that was soaked in sweat, and I'm trying to put pants on, but I keep collapsing because I was so weak. But I finally I like crawl to the door, and I get to the door and I just collapse, and he comes over and like yells at me, and I like get the door open, and I'm like laying in the doorway, and he kicks me, and I fall down the stairs. And that kind of jolts me out of the unconscious moment that I was having. And I was like, take me to the ER, please. I'm begging you, take me to the ER. You know, he's like, Cook County? And I'm like, no, anywhere but Cook County, don't know. And then like I went out. As it was, I was experiencing an ectopic pregnancy, and which never come to term. And my fallopian tube had ruptured with the fetus inside, so they had to remove that. That's why I was internally bleeding. And I spent the week in the hospital, and he spent the week in honeymoon phase, as it's called, with me, apologizing profusely for doubting me. And of course, I took that to heart. You know, there was a lot to process. Not only just the physical repercussions of an ectopic pregnancy and having the fallopian tube removed and losing all that blood, but emotionally, knowing that there was a child in me, it was his child. So we went home, but it immediately returned to how things were and got worse. You know, he was abusing my animals. He was angry with me that I wasn't like immediately doing dishes the day I got home from the hospital. I mean, it was insane. Not only did he break my things that were valuable to me, both, you know, monetarily and emotionally, he would strangle me. For a while, it never really felt black and white. Like, I wasn't sure, is this abuse? It was kind of like the sexual trauma that I'd endured. It was never so black and white. It was like not a violent scene in that scenario, and in this one, it wasn't like he, at this point yet, was like just punching me in the face. It was sort of shrouded in a lot more shades of gray. Well, he just has to work out some anger, but he's, you know, like, it could be so much worse. You know, it's like these things that I would say to rationalize staying with him. But then, you know, the abuse did get worse. I was ready to leave at that point. I packed up enough stuff to get me by, and I was gonna go stay with a friend, and he came home right when I was about to leave and got really angry and tried to take the air out of my tires in my car so I couldn't leave. And when I said I was going to leave anyway, he said he was going to just throw everything that was left outside the window. I thought for a second, like, okay, all right, I can deal with that. I'm going to still go. And then he knocked me out and punched me right in the face. I fell on the ground outside, and 3 men who were driving by saw that happen and got out of their car with a baseball bat and chased him away. So I left for a couple days, and I came back to get some things, and you know, when he was supposed to be at work, and he showed up while I was there, right back into honeymoon phase, very apologetic. I bought it all, as women often do, and I stayed, and things were fine for a very short time period until they got worse again.
As we live in a patriarchal society, I don't believe that women are only controlled on a macro scale through the likes of political agendas, but as well it is shown in our interpersonal relationships on a micro scale. It is common for women to give away their power and to be controlled mentally, emotionally, and physically by a male figure.
In like an apologetic soliloquy that he gave me, he brought out powder in capsules and said, well, take this. And I didn't know what it was at first, and I did. The first couple times I did it did not make me feel great. I threw up. He's like, no, that's supposed to happen. Just try it again. I was snorting it, by the way, at first. A friend of mine was also using it and knew that it was heroin. And she was shooting it. And she showed me how to shoot it. And then when he found that out, he was angry that, you know, I had gotten that lesson from somebody else. And he beat me up for that. It was like, you know, it was just like replaying this thing that I went through when I was younger. Like, get abused and then get your ass kicked for getting abused. You know, he was always accusing me of cheating on him, and I wasn't. But to play the game, basically, I came back and I was like, well, I did cheat on you, or something like that. And he was just furious. So he went outside and he kicked my car a whole bunch of times, and I thought he was leaving from there, and then he came back up and started like pouring. Like I opened the door and I just had it open part way, and then he started pouring something on me, which ended up on my legs. And it was gasoline. And he lit a match. And before I knew it, I was like rolling around trying to get the fire off of me. And he told me not to tell anyone, that he would come back and kill me. Don't even go to the hospital, you know, and I was terrified. And I started treating my wounds myself. I continued to do heroin, and now I was shooting it. And that sort of like replaced the need to deal with the pain. And then I really hated myself for that. It was so out of my character, you know. Nobody knew except for like the 2 people that I was using with at the time, and I couldn't stand being around them. I kind of gave up on a lot of things. Eventually I just like dropped out of school right before I finished and used the money I was going to use for school to keep that habit up. My grandmother, who I was always so close to, unwittingly contributed to my drug fund. And then I just hid out by myself for a good couple of years. And I wasn't suicidal, but I was certainly like not trying to stay alive. I was just waiting to die because I knew it was going to happen. The only time I talked to anybody was when I went to the store really quick, when I went to the bank, or an occasional dinner with like my grandma and maybe other family. But otherwise, I stayed at home, and my entire day was about like how I was going to get money to continue using these drugs, and also mentally beating myself up for using them at all. And I never had my leg looked at, but I hated it, so I would shoot heroin into my leg too, making it worse, of course, and often missing the vein. I just got weaker and weaker, and I was getting really skinny because I wasn't eating enough. I was obviously not taking care of myself well enough. And you know, my family would see me every now and then when we'd go to those family dinners, and they would tell me like, "Oh my God, you look so skinny." One of my sisters was almost like would say it in like an envious way, like, "Oh my God, you look skinny." And then like another family member would be like, "Do you have cancer?" So one day I packed up all my stuff, all of my paraphernalia, and I just wanted to get rid of it. I wanted to be done. If it's not around, I can't do it. You know, how can I continue affording to do it anyway? I did have one friend who I didn't hang out with, but sometimes I would cop for him. I would pick stuff up for him, pick drugs up for him. And I remember I had some stuff that I couldn't shoot, so I called to see if he wanted it to snort it, and he said yes, so I held on to it for him. I was going to drop it off to give it to him, but he wasn't around, so I still had it in my car. And now I was taking all of the stuff from the place I was living to just get rid of it. So I drove over to my grandma's house. It was pretty late at night, and I had a key to her house, but I didn't bring it with me. And she was sleeping, so she didn't answer the doorbell. She was a very heavy sleeper, so I didn't want the lights shining right in her house. So I drove around the corner and parked my car and sat there, and then I realized my lights were shining inside someone else's house, so I turned my car off. I shot up and I nodded out with my car off and all my stuff there, and I was sleeping when all of a sudden I came to because I heard tapping and a flashlight shining into my window, and my car was on with the air conditioning on full blast, and when I had passed out, it was off. And I was like half conscious, and there were 2 cops standing on either side of my car, told me to get out of the car, and I did, and they asked me if they could search it. I didn't know that I could say no, so I said yes. And, you know, they spent a long time searching my car, digging in every corner and every crevice, pulling bags apart. I had a lot of stuff in that car. And finally, they handcuffed me and took me in. Now, what they found wasn't everything that I brought with to get rid of. They only found that little bit that I had saved from my friend, which was in my purse. Everything else was like inside a bag, inside another bag, and although they had torn everything apart, they didn't find that. You know, before I went to my grandma's house, when I was having this, like, existential sort of moment, knowing that it was just, I was done and I needed a way out. There was a park right down the street from her house, and I had stopped there and sat there, and you know, the stars were out, and I just looked up at the sky and I was like, I don't know if anyone's listening. I don't know what I'm even asking. I just know that I need help. Here these men showed up in uniform, put me in handcuffs and put me in the back of a cop car and took me to the police station. They kept me overnight in this holding cell. Now, one good thing, if you're going to get arrested, here's a little tip: get arrested in the suburbs, because they give you $5 worth of McDonald's breakfast in the morning. So I got up, I had my breakfast, and I was still really weak, and then they were going to take me to bond court. When we got there, they do a pat down. They patted me down and they saw my leg, and immediately were like, she can't be here. She needs to go to an emergency room, like now, if not yesterday, if not like a year or 10 years ago. So this rookie cop puts me in the back of the car, and while we're driving, I ask him if he'll roll down the window, and he says sure, and he turns the radio on, and this song comes on the radio called I'm Yours by Jason Mraz. And the lyrics in that song, just like I couldn't tune them out. You know, that the window's down and my hair is blowing in the wind, and this song is on the radio talking about how nothing's going to stop me but divine intervention. I won't wait no more, I'm yours. You know, and I kind of had just looked up at the universe, at the stars, the night before, as if to say, I'm yours. I'm not going to hesitate anymore. I'm yours, you know, like, give me that divine intervention. So we get there, and this poor rookie cop is like traumatized by it all already, I can tell. All these doctors were coming in and giving me these sort of like daunting diagnoses, and you know, nobody wants to help a junkie. The minute that you say these things to a doctor or an officer or, you know, anybody with authority, they completely write you off. And my life was like a series of that sort of feeling of being written off. So I'm transferred to this hospital across the street, and I'm there for a couple weeks. And while I'm there, I get this staph infection, I get MRSA. I have osteomyelitis, which is like kind of like a bone infection. I get these bone debridements on my legs, I get blood transfusions, I get antibiotics pumped in me. My grandma was there every day, and I remember one day, you know, I had told her the whole story about everything that happened that night that I went in and everything before. And I remember her saying, like, why didn't you just come to my house? If you would have just come to my house, we'd be sitting at a deli right now eating corned beef sandwiches. I was like, no, we wouldn't, Grandma. You'd be at my funeral. Meanwhile, I was having like allergic reactions to the medications they gave me, so my body was covered in rashes, and you know, my legs were going to be amputated, my teeth were falling out, just like everything felt horrible. And at the same time, I was grateful. Like, I had so much gratitude that I was still alive, and that I was in a place where people were trained to caretake, which is something that I didn't have. I took a field trip to another hospital and saw this surgeon while I was still an inpatient in long-term acute care. And he was like, yeah, you don't have to have your legs amputated. You just wear this machine for a few months, and then we'll do this skin graft surgery, and you know, so on. And you know, they won't be good as new. You'll still have issues with them, but they'll be yours.
After a year in and out of hospitals, Jane was finally released to restart her life. She was no longer with her abusive partner. She began finding relationships, old and new, and to her pleasant surprise, a very special person came along.
I had been kind of hibernating from the world for so long, and then after I got out of the hospital, I was in this pretty isolating relationship, unsatisfying relationship. You know, in every relationship I've ever had, there's always been a gift, usually retrospectively. So I moved in with that guy and found this great apartment. That guy moved out, and I had to put an ad up for a roommate on Craigslist. You'll know all about that way before I did. And I put this ad up for a roommate to move into my Zen Den apartment. And his father was one of those people. He came to look at the room and he was like, you know, I don't think this room is for me, but I like you. Can I take you out? In so many words. And I said, of course. So he did. And 6 months later, I was pregnant. I didn't think I could get pregnant. With all my health situations and my one fallopian tube, I didn't think it was possible. But life happens when we're not prepared. So he showed up, and I instantly knew that it was meant to be. I didn't know that my relationship with his father was going to last. We tried, sort of. He moved in, and it didn't work out ultimately. 3 months after he was born, my grandmother, my best friend, psychic, mama of a grandmother, passed away. She was my binding thread to this earth. She was my reason for staying here even when I didn't want to. It was kind of like the universe was giving me one heck of a reason to stick around. One of, I think, my biggest fears in having a child was in recreating my own childhood, as I think is the case for a lot of people. It's a shame that his dad, you know, didn't want to stick around, and it was also a blessing in disguise. And I also realized that, like, we may share a life lesson in that we didn't live with our mother and father together, he nor I. But I can do that lesson differently. You know, I can still let him know that he's loved by both of his parents and support his father and hope that his father supports me, and still provide like a loving environment, whether we're together all the time or at all or not.
As Jane began to rebuild her life after the hospital, she was led down a path to discover the healing gifts that she was meant to offer the world.
So when I got out of the hospital, when I was released, after I recovered and got healthy, I came back as promised and volunteered my time, starting at the reception desk, where I would draw personalized visitors passes for everyone that came through the door with art pieces and affirmations on them. Sometimes I would take those passes home and like spend the night designing really elaborate pieces of art. I became sort of known for that at the hospital. And after being at the reception desk for a short period of time, I ended up just getting these promotions and asked to work in various other departments of the hospital. So I started giving tours to family members of potential patients and working in administration and doing data entry, and ultimately working as a patient advocate and actually going into the patient rooms to check on them and speak to them and give them healing and encouragement, and all of the things that I sort of wanted to have while I was a patient. And that inspired me to want to go beyond the hospital setting.
While Jane was in the hospital, an alternative therapist gave her her first Reiki session, and instantly she knew she had to learn about this healing modality. After becoming a Reiki master teacher, it segued into her learning and discovering other alternative therapies.
I started accumulating singing bowls and gongs and flutes and just instruments and healing tools. Took some cranial sacral classes and EFT, emotional freedom technique or tapping. And of course, I learned how to calculate and assess numerology, life maps, and blueprints. And all of these tools have helped me tremendously. So I wanted to and knew that it was part of my purpose to share these gifts with as many people as I could. Everything I do centers around vibration, I would say. Einstein said that everything is vibration. He was a pretty sharp cookie, so I'd say he was spot on. Tesla said that if you want to know the secrets of the universe, look to energy, frequency, and vibration. So all of these things have just fallen into my life in times and ways that were so important for me. And pretty much everywhere I go now, I share them. You know, I do this for work, and I also just do it because I love it. I don't think I ever meet anyone without asking them when their birthday is and giving them a little unsolicited advice. So I'm not really the type of person to go to work, sit in a cubicle for 8 hours, come home and sit in front of a TV, and have very little expansion in my life. So I like what I do because I get to travel around, and I do a lot of different jobs. I do a lot of healing jobs. I do these other odd jobs too, just because I want my son to know that his mom works hard and that you have to persist at things and that you can do a lot of different things and not fit into a box, literally and otherwise. Just having the freedom to explore, that's one thing that I will say that I feel really blessed to have gotten from my childhood, being that I had almost no guidance whatsoever, almost no structure, and almost no boundaries. I was able to find my way myself. All of these tools have kind of come into my lap exactly when they needed to. We don't get what we want, we get what we are. And so when I was attracting less desirable things, there was something in there for me to learn. That's not me condoning staying in an unhealthy situation, but it is me condoning or encouraging embracing the divinity in every situation, and then also making the appropriate changes to better it. We're not all supposed to have the same life, All of the terrible, horrible, traumatic things that I have endured have made me so unconditionally loving and forgiving and accepting of everyone. Doesn't mean I won't set up boundaries or assertively decline an invitation to the wrong thing that's not for me. But it means that I embrace where everybody is and who everybody is, which is unconditional love, So I think just gaining that compassion and finding, just the way that I was laid off from the hospital, and it led me to my healing journey in the capacity that it's at now. Everything has just worked out magically. I don't love it all the time when it is happening. I don't like it all the time. I don't want to be doing it all the time. But there's always a reason for it, and I see that now.
What a lot of today's views on spirituality ignores are the negative aspects of archetypes. I chose Jane because of her painful initiation into becoming her authentic self, and what it took to fully embrace her creativity and unique gifts. How I see the wild woman archetype is like a seed, planted and buried under oppression, but with one's tenacity, resilience, and guidance, she comes to life. This response to trauma can be described as adversity-activated development, where new elements and characteristics have manifested through the personality that did not exist before. And it was through her pain that her unique identity emerged.
Done me and you bet I felt it. I tried to beat you, but you're so hot that I melted. I fell right through the cracks. box. Now I'm trying to get back. Before the cool done run out, I'll be giving it my best. This and nothing's gonna stop me but divine intervention. I reckon it's again my turn to win some or learn some, but I won't hesitate no more, no more. It cannot wait. I'm yours.